At the Missouri Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, our motto is working better together. Over the past year, all of us in state government have lived up to that motto by serving Missourians throughout the challenges of fighting COVID. We adapted, innovated, and persevered through it all. Through the state's ongoing inclusion and diversity efforts, we support these shared values, including this year's celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. When we planned this celebration, we wanted a program that could inspire and renew our commitment to public service. And I could think of no better person than Secretary Elaine Chao, who embodies distinguished public service, as well as a truly inspirational personal story. I recall as a college student the first time I heard about Elaine Chao. A news article about the new president and CEO of United Way of America included a photo of an Asian woman. It recounted her tremendous resume of public service, from White House Fellow to Deputy Maritime Administrator and Chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, to Deputy Secretary of Transportation and Director of the Peace Corps. But what really struck me was that she had immigrated to the U.S. at age 8 and spoke no English. And now she was heading up the largest, most well-known charitable service organization in America. As a first-generation immigrant myself, it blew away my preconceived notions of what America's promise could mean. Little did I realize that a decade later, I would have the opportunity to work closely with Secretary Chao, when she became the first woman of Asian descent to be appointed to a president's cabinet in U.S. history, and served 8 years as the U.S. Secretary of Labor. Over 13 years, I witnessed firsthand her consequential leadership, integrity, and compassion. She never forgot her roots and was always ready to lend a hand to others in their time of need. And then she answered the call to serve again as U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Over these many years, I am grateful for Secretary Chao's mentorship and providing me with unbelievable opportunities to develop personally and professionally. Whether we were working on the annual Asian Pacific American Federal Career Advancement Summit, the Opportunity Conference to improve support of historically underserved communities, or the U.S.-China Strategic Economic Dialogue, she showed me that there is tremendous opportunity for each of us to thrive and succeed in America and on the global stage. Elaine Chao's story truly illustrates the art of the possible. Now, I'm delighted to have Secretary Chao join us for a very special Show Me State fireside chat. Welcome, Secretary Chao. So nice to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, again, delighted to have an opportunity to rejoin you and talk a bit about your illustrious career and your, the many accomplishments that you have. But, knowing you for so long, I know family is just so important to you. And, you have such an interesting story of your arrival here in the United States, at age 8, not speaking any English at all. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you and your family adapted to a new life and culture here? And knowing that you didn't know any English when you first arrived, how did you learn the language and the culture?
Well, I came when I was 8 years old. My father had come 3 years earlier. He was one of the youngest sea captain of his time at the age of 29. But, sea life is difficult. He was away at sea for many months of the year. So he decided to take a national examination, scored #1, broke all the records, and had a chance to go to America to study. My mother was then 7 months pregnant with their third child. And she was so brave. They both decided that he would still go to America, even though they didn't know how long it would take for them to be reunited. Well, as it turns out, it took about 3 years. And the only passage he could afford was, for us, was aboard a freighter, a cargo ship. And so he did not see his third daughter until she was 3 years old. And our initial years in America were very tough. We lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment, although we thought it was wonderful, in Queens, New York. My father held 3 jobs to make ends meet. And my sisters and I, we were often bullied in the playground because we didn't speak English. So what I would do is I enter third grade, and every day I would jot down whatever was on the blackboard onto my notebook. And every night after a hard day's work, my father would come home late at night, wake me up, and we would go through my notebook together. And he would decipher what was on the blackboard, teach me the day's lesson, and that's how I learned English.
Such a wonderful story, and certainly, it totally, goes back to your family relationship and how close you are, right? I know that your family has always prided education. Your father has always been a strong example of that, as well as your mother. And, knowing that, how have you, I guess, built on that foundation of education in the different roles that you've taken on? Certainly you've broken so many barriers, being the first woman of Asian descent to be on a president's cabinet, not once, but twice, first as Secretary of Labor and then Secretary of Transportation, unanimously, confirmed by the Senate for both of those roles. And, how did you, build on that foundation of family and education, knowing that, again, you had a lot of barriers that you broke through. A lot of folks were watching you. And how did that influence your leadership and your actions in those roles?
Well, most Asian American families really emphasize education because they know that in the turmoil of life, the only asset that you can safely safeguard, regardless as to what happens in the world, is your mind. And that means education. So my parents always emphasized education, and we knew that we had to go to college. I think as for, other times when we've had difficulties, the hope and optimism of my parents were really inspiring. They always believed that the future would be brighter than what we are enduring right now. And they imbued within their children tremendous just sense of possibilities and hope for the future, and believe in this country's opportunities.
And, on the subject of leadership, again, you've had so many seminal roles out there, but, in your role as Secretary of Labor, there was just such tremendous strides made. I mean, you had such a stellar workplace safety and workforce safety record out there. You signed some pretty significant agreements and collaborations with organized labor. More than half of your senior leadership team were women. You really were able to, again, bring a lot of people together and really focus and have a unique way to, gather folks around, really focus on what matters and get some things done. In this time when our country is so divided, what is your advice? And, from your experience, are there steps that we can do, again, to build on those relationships and, again, make a brighter future for our nation?
Well, I'm really proud that you are now a leader in the state of Missouri and also for the country on labor issues as well. That was always my dream, that I would be able to help others fulfill their potential and for them to realize wonderful lives of contribution, to our country. You asked before about, what does all my early childhood experiences offer in terms of leadership? I think for those who, have endured hardship, take heart, because those hardships actually make you a better leader. You become more empathetic, you understand other people more, you can explain things in a more relatable way because you've been through hardship yourself. So when I look back upon my life and I look at, what I've experienced, and I look at my community and what they've experienced as new arrivals, I think it makes me a wiser leader, a more empathetic leader. And that's why I've always fought for, everyone who's been underserved or who are vulnerable to be able to access greater opportunities in mainstream America for themselves and their families.
Yes, I remember quite vividly the first time you talked with me, we were developing an internship program at the Department of Labor. And one of the big things that you wanted to make sure was that we had good representation in that internship class. And when I asked you, was there a particular reason why you were very firm about the fact that you wanted to make sure that young people, regardless of their background, felt that they belonged and understood government, and that government was something that they should be interested in and involved in, even if they didn't choose a career at that. So thank you for that. Thank you for inspiring so many other generations of young people to consider public service and also, a greater interest in government overall. Now, I know, more recently you did take on the role of Secretary of Transportation. And while you were there, you had several priorities in terms of being, focused on safety, being number one, that you invested in the infrastructure and really thought through a broad vision of what the future of transportation could be. Could you share with us some thoughts? Where do you think we're headed in that area?
Transportation is at a pivotal time in history. There are so many new technologies that are being explored, researched, and reviewed. So when we were at the Transportation Department, we talked about, fostering innovation without forgetting the issues of privacy, security, and of course, safety. So my mantra was always, we want to engage with the emerging new technologies in the transportation sector to address legitimate public concerns about safety, security, and privacy without hampering innovation. Because innovation is one of America's greatest exports. We are predominant in the world because of our freedoms, our creativity, our innovation, and we need to preserve that. And so we are now on the brink, the precipice of seeing a whole new world on autonomous vehicles, on drones, on Hyperloop, on supersonic travel, on commercial space. Commercial space tourism is going to be a reality of the future. And right now, it may take 26 hours to go from New York to Sydney, Australia. Well, we can come to the point one day in which we can go on a rocket ship and land in Sydney, Australia, like 25 minutes later. Or we're talking about, a little bit closer to reality is supersonic travel. That's going to be coming up and becoming a reality. You can go from supersonic travel from London to, Washington, maybe 3 hours. Now, the environmental aspects of noise has to be handled, but these are the kinds of things that we're seeing. We're talking about air taxis, drones. Drones offer so much safety features. So instead of having in person, a human inspection of nuclear power plants, of railroad tracks, more and more commercial use of drones for inspection purposes in the face of worker shortage or in the face of less than safe environment. The drone is very helpful. When there are forest fires, for example, drones are deployed over burning forests to see, what is going on. And then, of course, we have Hyperloop, high-speed rail. So one of the pillars of my tenure was to prepare for the transportation system of the future. And it's very exciting to see.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly very excited about that as well here in the state of Missouri. We certainly have had a lot of discussion about Hyperloop, but I am very happy to thank you as well for the investment that you all made from the Department of Transportation into Missouri for the Rocheport Bridge. I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about that. And since it's such a big infrastructure project for us right on I-70, a major thoroughfare that connects St. Louis to Kansas City right across the middle of the state, but such a major highway in the national infrastructure of movement of goods, services, and people. Again, thank you so much for your investment here in Missouri. We truly appreciate that. Going back on your time as Secretary of Transportation, I know there was a fairly significant and frankly personal moment for you in 2019 when you were able to go and attend and celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Intercontinental Railroad. And, could you share some memories about that? And, again, the significance to the Asian Pacific American community about that anniversary and that major infrastructure project in our nation's history.
There's no question that the completion of the Intercontinental Railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, was one of the most impressive infrastructure projects in our country. But here is where cultural differences show up. So when we went to, I went to like 5 galas that evening. And the gala with, the mainstream America, the Anglo society, they were celebrating the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, as they should. But when I went to the galas sponsored by the descendants of the railroad workers, their gala had a different atmosphere. Many of their ancestors were killed in the construction of this railroad. So for them, this is not the 150-year anniversary celebration of the completion of this railroad, but also a commemoration of the sacrifices that the railroad workers made in completing this railroad. So in 1967, 100 years after the completion of the railroad, then Secretary of Transportation made his way to Promontory Summit, and he complimented and celebrated the work of the organizers, the owners, the funders of this railroad, but he never mentioned the Chinese railroad workers, of which there were 14,000. And the Chinese railroad workers carved, chiseled their way through the toughest mountains of our country to make this railroad possible through tunnels that they've made. So when I went in 2019 as the first Asian American Secretary of Transportation, actually first Asian American female Transportation Secretary, but first Chinese American Secretary of Transportation, it was especially moving and poignant that I spoke about the contribution of the Chinese railroad workers. 14,000 of them worked on this railroad. They worked through the heat of the desert in Death Valley, and they worked through the incredible freeze of the wintertime, and they chiseled by hand through the hardest mountains, the hardest rocks of the mountains of this country, through the mountain range that was in Utah. And so I think it was especially poignant that the first Chinese American Secretary of Transportation would be there to commemorate this achievement, to acknowledge the contributions of the Chinese railroad workers, all of whom could not qualify for US citizenship, because at that time, they were not allowed to have US citizenship. And yet they prevailed, they persevered, and they contributed to the conclusion of this massive, impressive infrastructure that united East and West, and that accelerated the westward trek and settlement of our country. So it was a tremendous achievement, and I was so honored that I was there to commemorate on their behalf, the railroad workers' behalf, their contributions.
Ma'am, you've had such a varied career, from private banking to so many years of public service. First as a White House fellow, then as chair of the Maritime Commission, Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Peace Corps director, president and CEO of United Way, and then 2 stints as cabinet secretaries. How do you keep, driving on this path? What has always kind of motivated you in this public service? And, how do you keep your teams engaged and going, especially during such challenging times as we've had this last year?
I never thought success was the final goal for myself. It was always the team. And I always believed in working for a goal that's larger than myself, and then galvanizing others to help along the way. I think a mark of a good leader is to craft and to give the vision of a shared goal. And I think most people rise to the occasion when they are working for a larger goal with impact on our country and our society that they understood. So I think of the key roles that a leader can offer is frequent communications. Just communicate, communicate, communicate. We live in such a crowded messaged environment in that it takes a lot to cut through all the clutter. And so I think it's really important to communicate inside the organization as well as outside the organization. So during the 1 year that we were, basically in COVID, we held over 2,000 video meetings with stakeholders. And I also cut personal videos thanking different groups for their help in keeping our economy going. And the real heroes during COVID-19 in keeping our transportation system open, operational, and safe were the transportation workers. During the lockdown, when most of us had the luxury of staying home, we wanted to make sure, of course, that we have enough provisions. Well, who do you think ensures all of that? It's the transportation workers who made sure that our stores' shelves were stocked with food, that our airplanes were still flying to transfer and transship medical equipment and essential medical personnel. Our air traffic controllers were still working in very tight, confined spaces. And we had railroad workers who made sure that freight was moving throughout the country, and port workers. So we had and truckers, I cannot forget truckers. They, of all people, were real heroes in ensuring that our economy and supply chain remain open, operational, and safe. And so communications is always key. And then empowering your people to think for themselves as to what are the next steps that need to be done. We've come this far. Phase 1 is over. What if phase 2 comes? Phase 2 in terms of opening up, and then there's a phase 3 opening up. So it's to develop a team that will anticipate and that will look ahead and see what needs to be done. So it's quite a challenge. But again, I think most people rise up to the occasion that this was such an important aspect of our economy, the transportation system, and all of us had a responsibility to do our part.
Well, I know that this message rings particularly true with our state government colleagues who are watching today, and to society overall. I mean, we understand the broad, bigger mission, and appreciate your comments on this because, state government, federal government, local government, we all were there on, task, making sure citizens were served. And so thank you again for that insight. I've really enjoyed our conversation so far, and we know we have a few team members who are quite eager to also pose some questions to you, and we hope that you'll have a few minutes to also address those as well.
Hello, Secretary Chao. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Lisa Warren, the Executive Director for the Missouri Commission on Human Rights. As we celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, why do you think it's important for all Americans to learn about cultural differences?
Well, I think occasions like May, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or February, African American Month, or September for Hispanic American celebrations, it teaches us to understand more other cultures. And there are cultural differences. For Asian Americans, I was raised to be relatively quiet, relatively reserved, and we were taught as children to be 90% input, 10% output. So in a vociferous, crowded, loud society, mainstream society like America, it was really hard for me to kind of find my voice. But I think what has happened to the Asian American community, the violence, the discrimination in the last year because of COVID-19, the anti-Asian hate incidences, all of that has shown our community the importance of being visible and vocal. And I think during this period, I also hope that mainstream America has had a chance to learn more about the Asian American community, what we feel about education, family, entrepreneurship, and that there are cultural differences. And if there's any good that can come out of this kind of period, then I think all of us should try to learn from that. But I think this has been a teachable moment for our country, and I hope that we emerge stronger because of it.
Hello, Secretary Chao. I am Presel Gwen, and I serve Missourians as a Field Compliance Bureau Administrative Manager at the Department of Revenue. I would like to ask you, as an Asian American woman who has served in the cabinet of 2 U.S. presidents, what helped you get ahead? What advice do you give aspiring future leaders?
I never thought about getting ahead. I was always so interested in what I was doing. My parents gave their children a wonderful gift, and that is the sense of curiosity. So I was always curious. I always wanted to know what was happening inside the room. And when you open up one door, another door opens. And so I was propelled by curiosity, which I think was very important. My parents also taught me to enjoy the journey. Once you get to where you want to go, so what? It's a journey in which you learn and meet other people that is most important. I always try to keep a very positive outlook. And because I was interested in what I was doing, sometimes the indignities that are visited upon us just don't mean that much. Because I think I know what I am worth. I know who I am. And in this particular instance, this person was mean to me. That's okay. I would never, and I teach myself, I will never act this way with another human being. So I teach myself, remind myself that, and then also to say that if I ever get into a position of leadership, I want to show a better example, a better way. So when it's all positive like that, I think you get energized much, much more. But I also say to people, one of the most important things you can do is to imbue within your children a sense of their own worth. If they know what they're worth, they're not going to take crap from other people. They will know themselves, they will have confidence, and they will help other people along the way. So I think, all those lessons were very valuable to me.
Hello, Secretary Chao. My name is Ashley Wilson. I'm the Fiscal Liaison for the MoHealthNet Division, which is the Medicaid program in Missouri. Today, I'd like to ask you how you face challenges or when you have to deal with setbacks. If you have any tips or suggestions on how you do that, I'd like to hear them.
All of us have something that is precious to us that can give us inspiration and encouragement at special periods in our lives. So for example, I have a little photograph. It's a 4x6 color photograph of a picture that I took when I went to visit my father's village, the one that he was growing up. And it's a very primitive little village. It's got basically 10 families. That was it. And going back as I did as an adult even, it was so primitive. It had thatched huts and it had chickens running around the dirt. And they were very happy there were chickens, because that meant that there were chickens. No, they could have had nothing. And I look at that photograph and I think, if my father can rise from that kind of humble, modest circumstance, then I, who carries his blood in my veins, surely has the courage and the strength to prevail. So when things get tough, I take out that little photograph of where my father's from, and it gives me tremendous inspiration and strength. And everyone has that. So you have to find something within your life that will inspire you in that way. It can be a picture of your mother, it can be a picture of whatever. It can be just a stone that you got someplace that reminds you of home or something. So preserve those touchstone memories and touchstone items. And when things get tough, as they invariably do for everybody, that you hearken back to those good memories that give you strength and inspiration. On the third point of the anti-Asian American attacks and violence that we have seen such an increase in the last year and 3-4 months, ever since COVID began, I think it was a wake-up lesson for the Asian American community that we need to be more visible and we need to be more vocal. We are Americans and we have a responsibility to participate fully in our democracy. And I would also hope for mainstream America, most of whom may not have seen Asian Americans very much in their communities. I hope that this period has opened up a whole new window into a new community that believes in this country, that are Americans. And while there are cultural differences, we seek the same goals, aspirations, opportunities that the rest of people in America possess, and most of whom came to this country seeking. So I hope that as we celebrate this May, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, that we have a greater appreciation for the great diversity we have in our country. That's not only Asian Americans, but Hispanic Americans, African Americans, Native Americans, European Americans who came in their own cycle of immigration as well. We are a nation of immigrants. We come from all over the world, and we can learn so much from one another. And in so doing, we benefit our country because we make our country the country of hope, of opportunity, and also an example to the rest of the world.
Hello, Secretary Chao. My name is Susan Carr, and I serve as a Human Resources Assistant at the Department of Revenue. My question for you is, throughout your career, you've often been the first female, person of color, immigrant, or American of Asian descent to take on a particular role. How have you dealt with people who may have prejudged your abilities based on stereotypes? How have you dealt with that personally?
Well, first of all, I try not to get discouraged. When people are mean to me, and they certainly have been, I try not to get discouraged. It is really important that you maintain your self-confidence and that you know who you are and what you are worth. Life is not easy sometimes, and there will be people who will not be kind. And the most important thing is not to let those slights cut against your self-confidence. Because if you let them destroy your self-confidence, you will have given them 2 victories. 1, they insulted you. Number 2, you actually believed it. So it's really important to maintain one's self-confidence, keep your eye on the long game, on the goal that you're trying to work toward, and then along the way, always remember to help other people. When I help other people, it's one of the greatest joys of my life. I love mentoring the young people. I'm so proud of Anna. Anna came to the Department of Labor in 2005. And then she worked her way from the chief financial officer's office up to be associate deputy secretary at the U.S. Department of Labor. She was the highest ranked Asian American non-career appointee at the department at that time. And so it was an incredible achievement. And if I had played a little role in that, I'm just so happy to do so. But this is a great joy, again, of living, and that is to share experiences, share kindnesses, and to be able to help others along the way. So really proud of you, Anna.
Well, thank you so much, Secretary Chao, for joining us today. I must say I am very humbled and maybe just a little embarrassed by your very kind comments. You know, again, I've had this tremendous opportunity to work with you over the years, and certainly have appreciated your mentorship and care over this time. And certainly I know that I'm better to serve Missourians, in a better place to serve Missourians, because of all the experiences that I've had in being able to develop under your care and tutelage. So thank you on that. Again, we appreciate all the time you spent with us today, and wonder if you have some thoughts to kind of close us out and send us on our way.
Believe in yourself and never give up.
Thank you so much, and we will see you back again soon.
Thank you so much.